In March 2005, a shocking discovery on a Dublin canal set off one of Ireland's most notorious murder investigations. Early one morning, joggers along the Royal Canal spotted a human leg, still clad in a sock, floating in the water. It was a grisly scene, and authorities immediately realized this was no ordinary accident. Garda divers were summoned. Over the next hours, they recovered more remains, body parts carefully bagged and discarded in the canal. A severed arm, a torso. Each piece hinted at unspeakable horror. The victim was soon identified through skillful police work. Garda plastered bulletins across the city with descriptions of the remains and the unique shirt that had been found. A Somali man living in Dublin recognized it from a photograph and contacted police. The corpse belonged to 39-year-old Farah Swaleh Noor, a Kenyan-born immigrant. Noor had arrived as a refugee in the mid-1990s and was working as a street hawker. Forensics confirmed the ID. Noor had fathered a child, and DNA from the child's mother matched the recovered tissue at 99.6%. Within hours, detectives had a name. Noor's death immediately put a spotlight on the family he had been living with. He was the live-in boyfriend of Kathleen Mulhall, a working-class mother of 6 from Tala. Kathleen's husband, John, and 3 sons kept to themselves, but her 3 daughters would not escape scrutiny. Charlotte Mulhall, 21, and Linda Mulhall, 30, were household names in the neighborhood. Both had struggled with alcohol and drugs and were mothers themselves. Yet nothing in their history hinted at what would follow. Investigators meticulously reconstructed the events of that fateful night. It began on St. Patrick's weekend, 2005. Kathleen, Charlotte, Linda, and Noor had spent the day drinking and taking drugs in Dublin's city centre. By late evening, they all returned to Kathleen's flat on Summerhill Street, heavily intoxicated. Kathleen later admitted she crushed an ecstasy tablet into Noor's drink, so they'd all be equally high. Inside that cramped flat, tensions boiled over. According to trial testimony, Noor began to touch Linda in a sexual way on the sofa. Linda resisted. He wouldn't let her go. The argument escalated. Detective Christy Mangan, who led the investigation, later summarized the sisters' account. In the confrontation, Kathleen suddenly yelled at the 2 younger women to just kill him. She handed Charlotte a kitchen knife and Linda a hammer. Charlotte sprang forward. He wouldn't let Linda go, she told Garda, and I cut him on the neck. The Stanley blade slit deep into Noor's throat. He collapsed to the floor, gurgling blood. In panic, Linda struck him repeatedly on the head with the hammer. The blow after blow rained down until Noor lay motionless. Charlotte and Linda had turned into attackers in a split second. But even with Noor dead on the living room floor, the horror was not over. In the small bathroom, the sisters set about a gruesome task. Over the next few hours, in a scene Detective Mangan called a nightmare, Charlotte and Linda methodically dismembered Noor's body. They severed limbs from the torso with kitchen knives. They decapitated the corpse. Even Noor's genitals were cut away. Linda later said she'd removed his penis so that he would not be able to rape my mother anymore. The crime scene was unimaginably bloody. By dawn, the women began to cover their tracks. They mopped the blood-soaked tiles and sprayed bleach liberally. To the untrained eye, the flat soon looked almost spotless. Garda later applied luminol, a blood-revealing spray, and found only a few tiny stains, no bigger than dandruff. It was the best forensic cleanup I've ever seen, Mangan said grimly. It was like an abattoir had been bleached from top to bottom. The sisters even destroyed bloody clothing. The murder weapons, the Stanley knife, a kitchen knife, and the hammer were discarded in a nearby pond. Next came disposal of the remains. Charlotte and Linda loaded Noor's severed limbs into black garbage bags and duffel bags. One by one, under cover of darkness, they carried them to the Royal Canal near Drumcondra Road. They threw each bag into the water, watching the body parts sink into the murky depths. But Noor's head was kept separate. In the early hours, they quietly packed the head in a trash bag and carried it to Tala on a late-night bus. There, at Sean Walsh Memorial Park, Charlotte dug a shallow grave and buried the head under grass. Kathleen later said they used a small shovel. With the head buried, the sisters returned to Dublin. For nearly 10 days, Dubliners were oblivious to the crime, but on the morning of the 30th of March 2005, fate intervened. Near Drumcondra Bridge, a cyclist saw something in the canal. He stopped. It was a human leg floating in the water, foot sticking out of a sock. He alerted Garda. Underwater divers were immediately called in. Over the next hours, they pulled 7 pieces of human remains from the canal: arms, legs, a torso, a foot. Only the skull was missing. By midday, the gruesome discovery was national news. Police now had to identify the victim and find his killers. Forensic labs rushed tests. They recovered DNA from the flesh and found a match. It was Farah Swaleh Noor. The T-shirt clue was confirmed. Garda offered a reward, and within hours a Somali man recognized Noor from the reports. The victim's identity was sealed. Noor was the canal body. Now police focused on who had motive and opportunity. Investigators knew Noor had ties to the Mulhall family. They examined his life. He had a reputation for violence. Records showed multiple convictions for assault, one involving a sexual attack. Relatives said he could be abusive. Noor's own history of aggression seemed to echo what had happened. But police also had something concrete. They began testing Kathleen Mulhall's flat where Noor had been staying. Inside the apartment, detectives found trace evidence of the crime. Luminol revealed tiny stains of Noor's blood in the bathroom and living room. Fibers on the floor matched his clothing. Each clue pointed back to the Mulhalls. This was the murder scene. By August 2005, Garda had enough to act. They placed Kathleen, Charlotte, and Linda Mulhall under intense surveillance. All 3 were brought in for questioning. Initially, they all denied involvement. John Mulhall, the sisters' father, was even questioned about picking up his daughters, but he had no connection to the killing. The sisters insisted it was a misunderstanding, but detectives sensed more was there. To get a confession, detectives focused on Linda Mulhall. One night, they invited her to a meeting at the Talagada station, framed as a general inquiry. Linda arrived for a chat. In a quiet interview room, she was offered tea and something to eat. There, the interrogators quietly prodded about the canal discovery. "Sometimes you just have to let people talk," one detective later explained. "You sit down, have a cup of tea, and listen." The tactic worked. A few days after that meeting, Linda called the station herself. "I need to talk to you," she told the sergeant. Detectives escorted Linda Mulhall back to the interview room. What followed was a 4-hour confession that stunned even veteran investigators. Seated in the station's cold room, Linda described every detail. She tearfully recounted Noor's unwanted advance, Kathleen's enraged orders, and the violence that followed. She admitted how Charlotte had cut Noor's throat and how she herself had hammered his head. She told them about cleaning the flat, bagging the limbs, and dumping them in the canal. Remarkably, Linda spoke calmly, almost matter-of-factly about it all, as if dismembering a human body were routine. She even outlined the disposal of the head in Tala and how they moved it with her son's school bag. Throughout the confession, Linda said that after everything, she and Charlotte had taken Noor's clothes and washed them. And even after all the talk, not a word of panic escaped her. The detectives sensed her emotion, mostly in her trembling hands, not in her voice. Detective Mangan later noted one chilling line Linda spoke. It wasn't just about covering up the murder. There was real rage, cutting off the private parts. That was a final insult, a mutilation. For the Garda, it was the final confirmation. With Linda's recorded statement on file, police had the full picture. Charlotte Mulhall was promptly arrested and charged with murder that same night. Linda was charged with manslaughter, given that she had now claimed the killing was a panic-driven act. Kathleen Mulhall, who by then was in hiding in England, remained at large until 2008. Charlotte and Linda were remanded in custody. Police prepared the case for trial, confident they had the evidence to convict. The trial opened in the Central Criminal Court in Dublin in October 2006. The entire nation followed every day. Prosecutors laid out the evidence: crime scene photos of the bloody flat, testimony from the canal divers, and forensic experts describing the vomitous evidence. Even the sisters' own statements were played on the courtroom speakers. The atmosphere was tense. Both Charlotte and Linda sat at the dock, flanked by defense lawyers, rarely showing emotion. Their lawyers put forward a plea of provocation and panic. They portrayed Farah Noor as a violent aggressor and suggested the sisters had panicked after he attacked. But the jury heard the whole story. including the sisters' own admissions. Charlotte testified to her part and Linda to hers. At one point, Charlotte, holding her baby daughter in her arms, even knelt in the dock and asked the judge if her child could stay with her in prison. The judge quietly refused. After a day of deliberation, on November 4, 2006, the verdicts were announced. Charlotte Mulhall was found guilty of murder. Linda Mulhall was found not guilty of murder, but guilty of manslaughter. The courtroom gasped at the split decision. The judge, Paul Carney, addressed them sternly. "This is the most shocking killing that has occurred in my professional lifetime," he said. Charlotte, now 22 with a toddler daughter, was sentenced to life in prison. Linda, a mother of 4, received 15 years for manslaughter. The nation reacted in horror. In newspapers and on TV, the sisters were dubbed the Scissor Sisters, a grim reference to how they had butchered Noor's body. Crime columnists noted that the story had transfixed the public, even fueling talk of ritual sacrifice in its shock. In pubs and living rooms, Dubliners quietly expressed disbelief. Garda themselves held press conferences but said little beyond the facts. Many admitted they were still shaken by what the two women had done. Detective Garda Danielle Kenner, the veteran in charge of the investigation, summed it up bluntly in a later interview. "I have worked on a lot of murders," he said, "and murder is murder. But in this case, the body was mutilated. And it was done by women, which made it particularly gruesome." His words echoed a sentiment nobody in the force ever expected. Life behind bars continued uneasily for the Mulhalls. Charlotte Mulhall was first held at Mountjoy Women's Prison and later moved to Limerick. Even in prison, she remained violent. In 2008, a photo of her holding a knife to another inmate's throat made headlines and forced a security shake-up. Linda Mulhall, serving her term in Mountjoy, struggled with guilt and depression. Reports say she even slashed her own wrists at one point and spent time under psychiatric care. The Mulhall family's tragedy didn't end with the trial. In late 2005, the sisters' father, John Mulhall, a quiet man with no criminal record, took his own life in the Phoenix Park. He had been devastated by what his family had done. Garda later noted he told friends he felt unable to face the community after learning the details. By 2018, the public saga had largely wound down. In January 2018, Linda Mulhall completed her sentence and was released. Journalists tracked her to a new home in Kildare. When approached, she said only that she wanted to move on. Charlotte Mulhall remains in prison under her life sentence. Kathleen Mulhall, after serving 5 years for obstructing the investigation, faded from view. Today, the Royal Canal is calm and scenic once more. Joggers and families stroll past, oblivious to the horror that once emerged from those waters. But for those who remember, the case of the Scissor Sisters is a stark warning. It showed that unimaginable violence can lurk in the most ordinary places, and even the closest family bonds can turn deadly.